Hello, everybody, wherever you are. Welcome to this new webinar produced by the Cultural Considerations Working Group of the Moon Village Association. My name is Remo Rapetti. I'm the co-chair of this working group. The subject of this webinar is indeed relevant for the well-being and safety of future astronauts that will land on the moon and establish a settlement there. In fact, today we are going to talk about space habitats and habitability, designing for isolated and confined environments on Earth and in space. I think that everyone can easily understand how tough and risky is life in space, in low gravity, in narrow areas, with no privacy, with a group of colleagues with whom you share every moment of your time, and how this situation affects your body capabilities and your behavioral health. Therefore, it is of the utmost importance to improve space habitats, to make them more comfortable and safer. To this end, architects and designers have a strong role. They have the mission of devising new spaces, of organizing the astronaut's life differently, of focusing not only on pure survival, but also on human factors. To attain this goal, they need the support of space psychologists, who for the last 20, 30 years have developed very effective solutions to the most important issues connected with the mental health of human beings living in space. Therefore, today we have asked an architect, Sandra Häuplik-Meusburger, and a psychologist, Sheryl, to give us a lecture about the latest advancements of their disciplines. Sandra is a researcher and practicing architect in habitability design solutions for compact and extreme environments. She has been teaching and conducting space architecture design studios at the Department of Building Construction and Design at the Technical University in Wien for more than 15 years. She is also the academic director of the Science Academy in Lower Austria and the academic director of the new part-time MVA on space architecture that will start next year at the Technical University in Wien. Sheryl is Professor Emeritus and Social Psychologist at the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston School of Nursing. As an internationally recognized behavioral researcher in extreme environments, for the last 30 years, Dr. Bishop has investigated human performance and group dynamics in teams in extreme, unusual environments. Together, they have recently written a book with the same title as this webinar, published by Springer. Before leaving the floor to them, I just wish to remind that at the end of the presentations, there will be a Q&A session run by my co-chair, Arthur Woods. Please use the chat button on Zoom to put forward your questions. And now, Sandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Remo, Rapetti, and Arthur Woods for the invitation and a very warm welcome. I am happy also to share this talk with some of my students at the TU Wien, so thank you for providing the link to them as well. Welcome to our webinar on space habitats and habitability. So Today we will talk about designing for isolated and confined environments on Earth and in space. You all know that we're venturing onward in our exploration on the Moon and Mars and further to the solar system. And very near on the horizon is the establishment of bases and communities on the Moon. A large community is already accumulating around the idea of a moon village, where we are guests today, and many different professions are involved in the preparation of the next steps towards human missions to the moon, including scientists, engineers, lawyers, economists, architects, psychologists, and many more. In order to support human missions, short and long term, we need to construct habitats that are safe and reliable, as well as ensure human health and well-being. So today's focus is on space habitats and habitability. Part of that effort will be the success.
Why don't you start our slides?
I'm sorry, I haven't shared my slides yet, right? So, thank you very much. Now, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Perfect. So part of that effort will be the success of integrating habitability into the design of extraterrestrial habitats. And in order to do that, we must understand the interaction between the humans and the environment we inhabit. The interdependencies between humans and the spaces we reside in involve complicated and complex processes that involve sustaining both the individual and the larger community that surrounds all human endeavors. This is a topic that bridges many disciplines. Thus, this lecture is shared with Professor Emeritus Sheryl Bishop. She is a social psychologist with a long track record of research on humans in confined and extreme environments, including space, and myself, an architect with a dedicated research focus on humans in space. Between the two of us, we hope to illuminate a few of the challenges, what is known and what is unknown, to give you additional useful resources and potential solutions to the task of making a home away from home, on the Moon and Mars, but essentially anywhere. We would also like to take this occasion to recommend our joint publication in case you would like to learn more about the integration. And of course, we are looking forward to the Q&A at the end of this talk.
Okay, it may seem obvious that designing any kind of a habitat, much less one for the Moon or Mars, we need to think about the humans who live in that habitat. But that has not historically been the case. Since the engineers were the first in charge, Sandra, would you click through these? Yeah. The emphasis started with building for the few to survive the environment. Next, the architects began challenging the limitations that produced the resulting stark, austere, purely functional interior spaces. Finally, the behavioral scientists raised questions about how the habitat and the inhabitants, both as individuals as well as the community they formed, fit together. The combined perspective is currently one where it is recognized that all three perspectives must be adequately addressed for successful long-duration inhabitation of our extraterrestrial places. Our adaptation to these challenging places will depend upon the interaction between humans and the environmental conditions.
When we talk about habitability, we mean habitability as an umbrella term that describes the suitability and value of a built habitat for its inhabitants in a specific environment. When we talk about habitation in extreme environments, we have to keep in mind that the extreme environment itself presents very different environmental conditions to deal with than we are used to on Earth, and that settings for which humans are not naturally suited. Therefore, all those design issues demand special solutions, also from an architectural point of view. So from the beginning, we are automatically dealing with a complex and interconnected system, basically with 4 major components. First is the environment and setting, in which the habitat is situated, which has immediate implications for the technological and engineering mechanics required. For instance, on the moon, there is a lack of breathable atmosphere, and that means the habitat has to be a pressure vessel with a closed loop system that recycles everything. Other issues we have to deal with through the habitat is extreme temperatures, high radiation exposure, threats of solar flares, and micrometeorites and the microgravity environment. Then, of course, we will need to understand the needs of the humans that will use the habitat. For example, the lunar daylight cycle is vastly different than on Earth, with 2 weeks of light and 2 weeks of darkness in most regions. And that difference will affect human performance and well-being. Last but not least, time is the substantial influencer. The longer the mission lasts, the more strenuous it is physically and psychologically for the individual crew member as well as for the whole crew. In addition, longer missions place more sophisticated technological demands on the habitat and the associated technology and systems.
So to start, we first have to know about the place, i.e. the environment, the kind of space that is needed, whether it's a minimal camp for a short stay or a living space for longer periods, a research lab or a vehicle to go from place to place. And you need to know about the people who will be using the space. Space is arguably the most extreme environment humans have had to face to date. Not only are we exposed to the presence of unique environmental and physiological extremes, temperature, radiation, the absence of gravity, but we are challenged to adapt and perform in the ultimate isolated, confined environment characterized by catastrophic outcomes from mistakes. Regardless of whether we are focusing on life support concerns, medical concerns, or psychosocial concerns, the key questions are the same. What are the effects that would come from this particular environment and mission? Do they impair functioning of hardware, software, or the humans that are living there? Are they self-limiting or progressive? Are they reversible, and when? And what are the countermeasures? How can we, by design, build spaces that provide ongoing support for the humans in that habitat?
All extraterrestrial environments we know, be it the moon, Mars, or other space locations, are naturally unlivable for human beings, as they lack critical resources such as breathable air, ready-to-use water, or natural protection from solar and galactic radiation and micrometeorites. In such an environment, one of the critical characteristics for living and working, and thus mission success, is the ordinary dependency on the habitat, its technological capability, as well as the socio-spatial framing. There has to be much more than just survivability in any place where humans will be spending long periods of time. This makes the habitat itself part of the optimal solution. And you can imagine that any extraterrestrial habitation system design will necessarily involve unique design elements in response to the very particular environmental setting. This, of course, often means to find additional and new innovative technical solutions. But think for a moment and let's imagine we find technological solutions for all those environmental challenges. Do you think that meeting these basic survival solutions make a habitat sufficiently habitable? I think you can guess the answer, because regrettably technical solutions to counter environmental challenges are only part of the 4 critical components in the habitability system. A habitat is a mere container and shelter is not sufficient for future long-term missions. And by the end of this lecture, we do hope that you will be convinced of the importance of those other two components, the human and time.
It took a while for engineers and architects to truly understand how much human needs determined whether a built environment was a healthy place to work or live in space. The problem was that human needs cannot be reduced to easily quantifiable, objectively measurable specifications for our hardware and software. Instead, they are qualitative, variable, and infinitely mutable characteristics for the wetware, i.e. us humans. The accommodation of the human element in mechanical and technological systems has been an ongoing struggle, and it still is. However, behavioral and human factors research across various terrestrial analogs, as well as evidence from space crews, has provided ample evidence that extreme environments in general share common characteristics and challenges. First is the reliance on technology. There is simply no habitation without a lot of technology to deal with the extremes of the environment. Second, physical and social isolation and confinement is a fundamental characteristic of being situated in an extreme environment. This is even more true of off-Earth locations. Third, there's a high risk and associated cost of failure that are inherently part of any dangerous environment. The unknowns of extraterrestrial locations magnify this risk and cost in yet unmeasurable terms. Fourth, highly physical, psychosocial, cognitive demands are magnified in any extreme environment where vigilance and constant efforts to maintain the integrity of one's environment for survival are required. Fifth, extreme environments have magnified needs for human-to-human, human technology, and human environmental interfaces. These demands place even a greater reliance on the technology and the cognitive processes. Finally, there's a need for team coordination, cooperation, and communication that become critical factors for successful coping and performance. The extraterrestrial environment conditions not only pose challenging for engineering and technology solutions, but they also dramatically affect the humans within that system as well. Gravity differences affect both physiological as well as psychological functioning. Ongoing life-threatening conditions produce psychosocial exhaustion, resulting in a loss of motivation, sleep disruptions, restlessness, and anxiety. Confinement and limited resources contribute to monotony, boredom, and difficulties in concentration and performance decrements. Next slide. Since the early 1980s, different researchers, including architects such as Connors and Häuplik-Meusburger, as well as psychologists such as Canis, Manzi, and Stuster, and myself, have repeatedly identified behavioral issues with mission and habitability design implications as critical issues related to space, and have been affirmed by subsequent reviews, research, panels, and even anecdotal team reports. Understanding the psychological drivers for these elements prompts greater insight into design improvements for future lunar and Mars missions. As you can see from the slide, the list of issues is extensive and covers virtually every aspect of human functioning: sleep, hygiene, safety, privacy, food, work, leisure, health, and well-being.
Based on our model, humans as individuals or groups are in constant interaction with the physical and social environment, which makes it also extremely difficult to quantify. To further complicate matters, this socio-spatial relationship and interaction is not yet fully understood and can also not be accurately predicted. However, there are two facts that we conclude from our research. First, there are basic commonalities to adaptation to the kinds of stresses inherent in extreme environments. And here we mean all extreme environments by definition, in space and on Earth, And second, human adaptation to these environments is affected, and that is important, by the living spaces and by the built environments in which the inhabitants live and work. This means that the designed and eventually built environment can be either supportive or limiting for human activities taking place. This importance of including human psychosocial, behavioral, and socio-spatial needs has been recognized and already integrated into standards, namely the NASA Technological Readiness and Habitation Readiness Requirements from NASA. And this recognition has just lately provided the impetus for systematic exploration and research into integrated habitability systems. So in 2006, Jan Connolly, Casey Dewes, Robert Howard, and Larry Tubes identified 8 levels of habitation system research and the corresponding needed research and design levels in alignment with NASA's technical readiness level requirements. Efforts such as this has facilitated immense advances over the last 15 years in habitability research across human factors, behavioral, and psychosocial domains.
So the identification of critical psychological and social spatial factors is still in the early phases of discovery. The difficulty of studying humans in extreme environments, the small group sizes, the enormous variability in environmental conditions, different mission profiles, and individual characteristics of the participants places particularly unique demands on the psychological and behavioral research for habitability. This is exemplified by the poignant quote on the screen by 2 eminent researchers in the field in 2000. Their conclusion was that we must remember that how people experience an environment is more important than the objective characteristics of the environment. Originally, a great deal of time and effort and research was put into trying to identify the right stuff, the best personality for space. It soon became evident that the kind of person that was exemplary for the early space programs, our military test pilots with a high tolerance for risk and life-threatening challenges, were not well suited for the more mundane tasks involved with routine shuttle missions that are very task-focused, goal-oriented, operationally minded, high focused on risk avoidance, high tolerance for repetitive tasks. Even more eye-opening was the discovery that some of these individuals who performed well in shuttle missions were not particularly well suited for the in situ residential missions such as MIR or ISS. It wasn't just that the mission profiles demanded different roles. It soon became clear that different personalities were better fit for those roles. This realization that the fit between the mission demands and the personality type was critical was further coupled with studies that produced supporting evidence for a focus on the situational or environmental experience as the defining factor rather than the particular environment per se. For instance, being the first crew for a mission to Mars will entail elements of pioneering and pushing the frontier, especially once they reach the planet. But the experience over the majority of the mission will be one of in situ residency, comprised of living with a few others in a small, confined, severely limited habitat, both during transfer in the spaceship and even after landing in a Mars habitat. A typical test pilot or expeditionary personality would be significantly distressed by the huge quotient of monotony, lack of stimulation, and restriction in activity. The challenges of living together will be similar for all long-term missions, even for lunar and orbital missions, where the trip will not be as prolonged, the terrain less challenging and better known than Mars, and the confinement and its implications for living will be no less challenging.
So it is an unbendable fact about the logistics of space travel and habitation that everything is limited. Physical space, storage, air, water, food, power, fuel, medicine, everything, even people. Therefore, we must plan to make do with what we pack and bring. Seems obvious, right? Still, it is one of the major design issues for a space architect, and we would even say it is the golden rule of space architecture. So what does it mean? It means making use of every possible item that you bring. It means largely doing without or making do with some kind of substitute. It means doing more with less. And it means using resources in situ. Every element that is available must be multi-purpose, flexible for reconfiguration, and amenable to being repurposed upon demand. Solutions cannot take up too much room or power, generate temperature fluctuations, vibrations, or other environmental disruptions. Solutions cannot require extensive maintenance or attention or interfere with the operation of other critical systems. In extraterrestrial environments, we will not easily be able to make new spaces as well. So thus, all utilization of space must be planned for, including needs for new spaces. The same, of course, applies to the resources. We can only take a finite amount of resources with us and must make those go as far as possible. So making do with or what you have or you can produce locally will be an inflexible rule of space living. And of course, the same applies to the people involved. You will be stuck with the same people in a confined environment for very long durations of time. There is no escape or others. There is no door to close off. So what you take is what you have or what you can create. One undeniable characteristic of humans and a wonderful gift to all of us and to space exploration is that humans will apply creativity to problem solving. This has been demonstrated throughout humankind's evolutionary history, and it's also the most single decisive reason for sending humans for exploration rather than robotics. In situations where you cannot possibly foresee all the unknowns, you need the creative flexibility of human imagination, just to fill the gaps between what you have and what you don't need and what you need. This slide shows just a few examples of creativity from extreme environments. The most famous one in the middle and the most successful example from the Apollo 13 crew that had to improvise in order to survive and to adapt the command module's canisters for use in the lunar model. The other ones are more cheerful, such as the one the Skylab astronauts improvising a Christmas tree, and they used food trash cans for that. So designing for extraterrestrial habitats means the focus should be on malleability, flexibility, and technology to enable residents to create what they need from what they have. We will illustrate those thoughts a little bit further without the coming slides. It was a little bit cramped. We had to sleep in small spaces. It was a little bit like camping. And of course, for 8 days on board the ISS, you can for sure do that. This is just one example of an astronaut statement showing that living in space has been until now a high-tech camping trip at best. For extended stays on the moon, it is going to have to become something different and more. Habitats will have to become supportive and nurturing homes for their inhabitants. You can imagine that there is a huge difference in requirements and expectations people have for shorter missions versus long-term space missions. Personal as well as spatial necessities change to a high degree. For instance, research has consistently shown that transitory spaces are felt to be temporary because they only address survivability concerns, whereas spaces that create feelings of permanence are perceived as homes and address issues of thriving, which is eventually the goal to establish permanent research presences of Earth. So for us architects and designers, it is important to understand that less than ideal conditions are bearable or can be coped with for short durations only, including being in one room together all the time without any privacy. Such short-term needs generally do not pose a problem for short-term missions exemplified by the Apollo astronaut. But camping is not a viable long-term approach.
The need to accommodate the needs of individuals as well as the interaction in a group is a substantial task for habitat designers. There is no one source to define design specifications. The evidence comes from multiple disciplines, multiple experiential sources, and both quantitative and qualitative research. For instance, during the production of our book, Sandra and I combined our research experience and activities on this subject, as well as gathered input from various others. Sandra has observed the relationship between the built environment and human activities in the space environment and during simulation studies on Earth. I've had the opportunity to study the dynamics of individuals and groups in many extreme environments, including desert survivalists, mountain climbers, deep cavers, polar expeditioners, Antarctic winter rovers, astronauts, aquanauts, and participants in multiple simulation facilities all over the world. We invited all of these individuals from a worldwide network to tell us about their own experiences with living in various extreme environments. It was clear from our own experience and observations, as well as a host of other researchers, participants, and professionals in the space field, that attention must be paid to the impact of confinement and isolation from family, friends, and the familiar social environment, and the loss of alternative others. Limited and forced social contact with a small group in combination with isolation can lead to interpersonal stresses that undermine individual and group cohesion and functioning. NASA has developed a program of behavioral awareness for astronauts and support communities that emphasize the importance of community, openness, networking, needs, expeditionary mindset, and countermeasure and training. It is essential to understand that the embedded social logic of living space and look behind the mechanisms by which space is used by its inhabitants. In limited ICE environments, these uses may be very different than non-confined environments. Living with others is not easy in the best of circumstances, but remove the opportunity to get away when the inevitable irritations flare, shrink the shared space to something larger than a large apartment, and limit the opportunity to interact with anyone else for a prolonged period of time, months or years, and suddenly there simply is not enough room. Then there are the myriad nuances of social existence to deal with, involving cultural norms, practices, and individual differences. Some of the big lessons learned have centered around the following. The need for privacy often becomes a territorial issue. We need personal space. We need to be alone, to not be heard, smelled, seen, or interacted with. Personal space is defined as mine and must represent an inviolate resources. Zoning out social conflicts, well, when little things become big things, conflict is inevitable. Mitigation should seek to minimize incidents. For instance, separate workstations with adequate resources so we don't have to share all the time. Private areas for social distancing. Automation for minimizing those burdensome housekeeping tasks. Areas for relaxation, as well as provide the means to countering rising tensions. We need play, we need leisure, exercise, sport, social activities. We say love goes through the stomach, but fine manners help. Well, one key aspect of the provision of high nutritional, well-balanced, and tasty food is to maintain health and energy for required activities. However, there is so much more to sharing food. Sharing food and meals provide opportunities for social gatherings. It associates pleasure from satisfying our hunger and taste with others, and a cooperative mutual beneficial activities. Food quality has been repeatedly demonstrated to hold a central importance for psychological and social well-being in all terrestrial and extraterrestrial habitats. Its importance is as ubiquitous commonality across time and human cultures. And then there's friendship, intimacy, and sex. Humans need touch. Relationships will happen regardless of the rules, the policy, laws, or prohibitions. Social structures and our habitat design should plan for the existence of relationships and provide flexibility to accommodate these normal human needs.
One of the considerations for fitting the right personality to the expected environmental experience is to determine or to foresee what that expected environmental experience will be. The limitation of actual living space is perhaps the most recognized characteristic of all extraterrestrial habitats. Combined with isolation, it can lead to feelings of confinement and associated feelings of claustrophobia, lack of privacy, and also lack of motivation. Yet, confinement alone is not simply a result of how many square meters per person you need. In addition to isolation from family, friends, and the familiar social environment, there are also other factors contributing to the feeling of being confined. This slide shows two images of the same module, but at different times. On the left is the interior view of the Destiny Laboratory as photographed in 2011. On the right is a photograph of the same module taken by the crew in 2020. So these images show two things. First, that design considerations for habitat use over the life cycle need to be integrated. It is also a little warning to the space station designers that all space modules have looked efficient and spacious when depicted as drawings or renderings, even shortly after implementation, as the photo shows, but still all of them have turned into cluttered places. These two images also show that while intended to be orderly and functionally designed with time and with being used by different people, different inhabitants over time, the modules turns into a messy and cluttered workplace that, in addition, can lead to fatigue and represents a significant source of stress. So while the introduction to complexity by design is a good and viable approach for architects, it can counter monotony and boredom for long-term missions. Extreme artificial and visual complexity can lead to the opposite. So the goal for all of us is to introduce meaningful complexity, but also maximum flexibility and the opportunity to organize living spaces around the needs of the inhabitants, rather than insist habitants to use the space as designed by the designers.
Any extraterrestrial habitat will be an artificially constructed environment in the most complete sense of the term. One key approach to instilling surprise, harmony, and complexity could be in appropriating natural design elements for interior habitat environments according to bionomic principles. That's the study of the relationship of organisms to their environment. Outside the space exploration field, there is ample thought on the inclusion of natural properties in building and interior design as a strategy for psychological and sensory integration. The complex properties of nature have been shown to be psychologically restorative in a number of studies due to their infinite variability, evolutionary association with beneficial resources, association with relaxation, and stress reduction activities. Many studies have shown that natural contents, and in particular landscape configurations, have positive effects on human functioning, representing sources of desired visual complexity rather than the undesirable visual crowdedness. In addition, astronaut reports underscore the importance of plants and living beings during their missions, and they have persistently created opportunities to interact with natural stimuli in response to the restricted and artificial environment of the habitat. During the Soyuz missions through 71 and 82 to 82, cosmonauts experimented with plants, and they even designed their own little greenhouse. The benefits were so evident that the Soviets even designed a device for the sole purpose of ornamental plant culture to provide psychological comfort to the cosmonauts in the station. The greenhouse at Amundsen Scott South Pole Station in Antarctica now has a sign-up sheet so that crew members can reserve private time relaxing in the presence of greenery. Now, nature will be radically different in space from what we think of here on Earth. Most notably will be the lack of open blue skies and rampant plant life with all its abundance of colors, textures, smells, growth, and food provision. On the moon, the verdant richness of our planet will not only be missing, but will be on display beyond our reach as we look back upon the planet. And there are multiple implications for that lack. So the inclusion of natural elements is a high priority. The question will be, how will we meet that need?
We will show you now some examples of humans and environment interaction. We see the principal function of any habitat is to provide living and working environment for humans as best as circumstances allow. And as previously noted, basic human requirements don't change in different environments. A human must sleep, a human must go to the toilet, eat, and be active in some way. So we as humans have needs for social space, but also needs for private space. These physiological needs are the very basic needs, and they represent the absolute minimum. We would now want to share some examples of how these critical needs have been addressed during actual space missions, and we take the Apollo missions as an example. So let's go through it. The Apollo missions, as you might know or consider, were highly work-oriented. The times allocated for activities besides work were minimal or even non-existent. References show that not until the Apollo 15 missions were the lunar stays long enough for the crew to get some sleep. The Apollo astronauts spent about 8 hours in their spacesuit outside in a planned EVA, and the command and service module had no spatial separations of function. All human activities took place in the same module, in the same volume. Sleep. What a waste of time, says it all. For most of the Apollo astronauts, scheduled sleeping time was a nuisance and not a desired activity. Apollo 17 astronaut Harrison Schmitt reported that he had slept for 2 or 3 hours and then would wake up and spend some time checking things out and then would go back to sleep. During the Apollo missions, available space was too small to separate the sleep area from other functions. That is why the Apollo astronauts slept next to each other in one volume. They had no privacy, but, quote, most pilots are not used to privacy, it was not a problem, quote end. During sleeping periods, astronauts tried to minimize noise with the help of earplugs and by turning the environmental control system a little bit down. The Apollo 11 and 12 astronauts took off their shoes while sleeping, but they left the spacesuit and helmet on, because they experienced that with the helmet on, it was quieter and breathing in of the lunar dust was prevented. Anecdotal references related to hygiene indicate that personal hygiene and the feeling of getting clean was very important for the Apollo astronauts. Lunar dust became a major problem, not only in the lunar module, but also inside the command and service module, because later in microgravity, the fine dust floated, and it was too fine for the cleaning system to effectively being removed. Apollo 12 astronauts also shaved 3 to 4 times during the mission, and for that, they were even provided some mirrors in the lunar module as well as in the command module. Apollo also gave us the first incidents of a long struggle to deal with going to the toilet in space. The Apollo bag system on the figure left, or it was called waste storage bag, was a transparent plastic bag with an opening, a finger pouch, and a pouch for tissue wipes and germicides. Also, the urine collection system offered some challenges. Astronauts complained that urine was in the couch areas, on the suits, and on the urine dispenser. For cleaning, astronauts used towels and hot water to clean. So this toilet incident may make you laugh, but the struggle with waste management has continued to date. On the left, you see the Skylab astronaut using the toilet on the Skylab space station. And in 2000, the first space toilet was flown, but proved to be inefficient and very difficult for women to use. In 2018, NASA spent 23 million on a new and improved toilet for the ISS that used better fitting attachments and specially designed vacuum suction to be used by women. Just recently, the Washington Post reported that during even SpaceX's first private flight last a few months ago, a tube came unglued, spilling urine onto fans and beneath the floor. The same problem was also discovered inside the Dragon capsule at the space station, according to William Gerstenmaier, a SpaceX vice president who used to work for NASA. And also the Inspiration 4 crew was reported to have had some toilet issues on their 3-day mission. This is another gentle reminder to the space designers that, as has been proven many times, even the most basic human needs can become big troubles. It will remain to be seen whether the 1/6 gravity of the moon will improve our success with effective waste removal systems, or we will find some other difficulties to explore.
Food systems for outer space habitats have changed to a high degree over the last 40 some odd years. The improvement of food packaging was vital for the quality and variety of the food. During Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, astronauts ate bite-sized dehydratable food in liquids from aluminum tubes. The later missions had hot water for the first time, and with the already improved food packaging, such as the spoon bowl, the quality of food menus constantly improved. Food systems in development for extraterrestrial habitats have been given high priority. Plants can be successfully grown in microgravity. Small greenhouses are regularly used on board at the International Space Station to spice up the food and for research. It's recognized and understood that greenhouses will need to be fundamentally different the further that we travel. They will have to be more autonomous and much larger. Crop hardiness and efficient growth systems will need to be robust and adaptable. Contributions to replenishment of life support systems through the removal of CO2 and production of oxygen has also been recognized as a beneficial feature of the inclusion of plants into the closed loop system required for extraterrestrial habitats. The prime objective was to land, go back to work. Prior slide. The prime objective was to land a man on the moon and return safely to Earth. But in addition, Apollo astronauts conducted various experiments on the lunar surface. ALSEPs, Apollo Lunar Surface Experimental Packages, were placed on the lunar surface by Apollo 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17. Each mission landed at a different site, and the compositions of the Alceps varied, including experiments on lunar seismology, soil mechanics, atmosphere, and gravity, among others. On every lunar mission, Apollo lunar mission, 2 astronauts were on the surface when EVA in the lunar gravity. In-flight maintenance was not an integral element, however, but the Apollo astronauts had a small set of standard mechanical tools which became famous during the Apollo 13 situation. Activities on lunar space missions were highly work-oriented. Apollo 17 astronaut Harrison Smith stated that, quote, "We are busy as explorers. You have to take advantage of the time that you have," end quote. Smith stated, "We had a manifest where everything was. We could look it up in an index and find it. The people on the ground knew better than we did where things were, and if we couldn't find something, we just asked them, where is it? And they would know where it was." The Apollo astronauts did exercise during their flights for leisure, but also for health reasons, for about 10 to 30 minutes with a device called the Exergenie. Although the priority for other than mission-related tasks was low, Apollo astronauts had some free time, especially during the lunar Earth transit. Apollo astronauts had a battery-operated cassette recorder and listened to music for entertainment. During the Apollo 14 mission, astronaut Alan Shepard bought a golf club and hit 2 golf balls on the lunar surface to see how far they would go. Other astronauts were hopping and singing between their experiments on the lunar surface, showing that humans will find a way to entertain themselves regardless of where they're at. The video shows Harrison Smith singing, "I was strolling on the moon." It's quite remarkable that astronauts experiment with new modes of moving across the lunar surface, even though it was slightly dangerous. Leisure activity number 1 has always been, though, to look out the window.
In addition to the normal complexities of human activities, sleeping, hygiene, food, within an isolated and confined environment, we have to incorporate the special and unique environmental lunar conditions of 1/6 gravity field. This is where we have to say gravity changes everything. The image shows the 2 extremes, or the drawing. It shows the neutral body position in relation to the gravity regime on Earth. And it shows the position, the neutral body position in a micro-G environment. The neutral position is a body posture that is relaxed, lengthened, and joints are naturally aligned. The neutral body position on the lunar surface is expected to be similar to the one we know on Earth, with slight changes of the horizontal and vertical reference, as well as the line of sight. But our experience on the moon is very limited. The Apollo crew members were housed in very tight quarters with extremely limited space to move around, and outside they wore heavy spacesuits. The larger volume of a lunar base may reveal surprising differences in lunar posture that we have seen in microgravity or terrestrial environments. It has also been noted here that even this drawing is not right anymore. Humans are individuals and never fit a reference position. Those only show that designers have to include variations in body movement and orientation. Here we have listed particular implications, design implications for the effects of partial gravity. So the orientation changes because the head is tilted down. Modes of translation and stabilization change. People and items need means to secure their positions in zero gravity conditions. And there is a change in the reach envelope, leading to a new so-called standard dimensions. We have already talked a lot about the powerful relationship between the built, the designed environment, and the lived-in environment, and that all those elements influence each other. It's important to not only identify when problems will arise, but where and how to instigate countermeasures. For instance, feelings of crowdedness, cabin fever, and claustrophobia are related to stresses coming from confinement and isolation. To maximize coping and adaptation of the group, the living space for groups must actively contribute to this process. The best solution will be those that is intuitive, meaning it's not requiring particular efforts on the part of inhabitants in order to benefit. You can compare this that you must use a treadmill before gaining any exercise benefit. And we are asking, wouldn't it be great if we could use specific design elements that deliberately but automatically promote beneficial countermeasures for stress and enhance performance and adaptation to isolated, confined environments? And wouldn't it be great if passive benefits be superior to any that required intention and compliance from inhabitants? Lighting, for example, is one design tool and very important for working and living in space. Historically, spacecraft lights were dim due to limited available power. Lighting, similar to color and texture and material surfaces, can enhance desirable moods and reduce feelings of crowding, and therefore promote physiological synchronization. Depending upon the activities, a variety of lighting system is needed. That includes ambient lighting as well as safety lighting, personally adjustable lighting conditions, and also different lighting conditions between the greenhouse and the habitat. Plants, for example, will need a different lighting environment than humans, and those differences represent design challenges that must be integrated with power demands for the station in general.
Personal and social space has been mentioned multiple times already as critical elements. The topic impacts every human activity and therefore every aspect of habitability. To summarize real quickly, separation of private functions from public is critical. We need flexible, definable, and redefinable interior environments to meet the needs for solitude, privacy, limit our social interaction, and provide individual control over the amount of contact we have with others, provides for group as well as individual activity, moderates feelings of confinement and crowding, and allows for individualized personalization, decoration, and individual differences. Knowing we need to design these capabilities, though, is not the same thing as knowing how to accomplish them. Even eating daily main meals in a group is a nearly universal social practice. Everyone typically has at least one main meal a day with different etiquette, social rules attached to each. The group meals are not only related to nutrition intake, but also reflect norms and rituals of a society. They serve as powerful, oftentimes unconscious and unrecognizable influences on expectations and behavior. Astronauts are no exception to taking their social norms with them. For example, on Skylab missions, observers noted that the crew members refused to travel over the table as they passed through the wardroom, even though that was the most direct path. When asked about their circuitous path, they reflected and responded that it just seemed inappropriate behavior to pass over the place where they eat. So the Skylab crews were unconsciously defining the space above the table as a sacred zone and avoided it in the same way they would refrain from walking or sitting on a table on Earth. This unconscious defining a space above the table resulted in navigable space not being used in a microgravity environment. Pictures from the Mir space station, as well as the ISS, show that astronauts often strive to arrange themselves around the table to fit everyone. Given the international nature of space missions of the future, It will be a challenge to provide for multiple social practices and etiquettes in multicultural habitats. Although we can assume that practices will align over time, the microsociety will be much more diverse than on Earth, and this will require creative spatial solutions to avoid hindering social or individual mealtime activities. Now, simply defining a shared space as a social space doesn't mean it will be a positive contributor to group functioning. Shared space inherently means cooperation is required in order to use the space. For activities in which there is an intrinsic positive benefit, like meals, the sharing is more naturally associated with a positive experience. However, close attention should be paid to areas designated as social space. Even meals can be made aversive if mandated at specific times and the choices in food dictated. Other forms of unintentional group-imposed mandates have been observed in analogs of space. One analog crew enthusiastically gathered together each night to watch a popular American series under the group rule of taking turns to choose each night's entertainment. When a French team member chose a movie with English subtitles for his choice, the team pressured him into changing his choice so they could watch the next installment of the series that they had been following. The greenhouse at Edmondson South Pole Station became in such high demand as a social space that they had to set up a rotating sign-up system to avoid conflict and tensions over access. Architects and engineers have frequently lamented that things weren't being used the way they were designed to be used. Therefore, the goal should be to design spaces to accommodate whatever use the inhabitants may need.
The windows, the design and integration of windows is a very good example for the interrelating aspects of habitability, because they combine the aspects of the mission-related requirements with the environmental constraints and the human behavior issues. There was a famous discussion on the inclusion of the window between the designer Raymond Loewy and NASA Associate Administrator for the Skylab mission. And Apollo astronauts had the shutters from their windows open all the time. Only when they wanted to sleep did they close the shutters in order to have this marvelous view of their home planet Earth. And by now, it is widely acknowledged that window gazing is still #1 leisure activity, and that astronauts and cosmonauts spend a lot of time in front of windows looking out at Earth. However, there is one lesson that we have learned and that we have to integrate into lunar habitation design. It is that human behavior has to be integrated into the design, because it's not enough to simply add the architectural element, but you have to think of how it's used. Skylab astronaut Gerald Carr stated in the 70s, for example, if something is going to stick out and make a nice handhold, it's going to be used for handhold. Easy lessons learned 30 years later in 2004, exactly because of this reason, a poorly designed flexible air hose caused a leak at the International Space Station. The hose was located in the Destiny Science module and close to an optical window for Earth observation. And due to a lack of appropriate handholds, the astronauts rapidly held on to the air hose while looking out of the window. So this was an unplanned, unscheduled, not foreseen practice, but resulted in a leaky house. So this little story is a wonderful example between engineering functionalism, what is needed, where and when we put it in, and human behavior. What will people do with it and how is it going to be used? So we have to deal with the fact that people, the so-called wetware, do not always follow specifications, actually often don't follow the specifications, and designers can help them. Of course, Another important issue on windows, we have to deal with external views that may lack depth cues or do not provide changing vistas, or where lingering in front of windows is not advised because of higher radiation exposure. This will be the case for lunar missions, for example. So in such cases, the substitution of virtual external displays may be necessary, or even maybe the better solution. In addition, or where the inclusion of windows to the outside is limited, we can use other technologies or elements like plant growth facilities, and integrative greenhouse design could be used to an extent as a substitute for windows, or to make up for a lack of visual information obtained from windows. In this case, the design integration of the activity of looking in and looking out provides a variety of sightlines within a compact and limited habitat. And we can, by design, increase available space psychologically through this sightline design or the relations between the different interior functions. Remember, we talked about this already. We only have what we bring, and we can create from what we bring. So substitutes or surrogates for various factors need to be thoughtfully planned ahead of time. And if we don't have natural elements like blue skies and greenery, we have to think what can be substituted for those features. If we do not have long views provided by depth perception when looking at star felts, we have to think what we can do using technological alternatives or substitutes. The answers to these questions lie in the close examination of needs, human needs versus resources, and our technological capabilities to find alternatives.
The standard of design practice for most operational environments has been toward minimalistic, patternless interiors where form follows function. But such environments are not those in which we evolve to perform at our mental best. Aside from nutritional and light support system applications, there are additional compelling reasons to ensure the inclusion and integration of green spaces into our extraterrestrial habitats. There's growing evidence from multiple fields that including plants and natural elements into our extraterrestrial habitat interiors might expressly assist innate natural emotional, cognitive, and perceptual processes associated with flexible creative thought, stress reduction, and personal emotional management. The convergence of evidence stemmed primarily from the Savanna hypothesis by Orens in 1980, in which he proposed that human preferences for certain natural landscapes was because we were genetically adapted to certain landscape forms and qualities through our species' evolutionary history on the African savanna. This was followed by Roger Ulrich's 1983 psychoevolutionary framework, in which it was proposed that humans have evolved to process environmental cues using rapid, automatic, and unconscious perceptual cognitive templates, in which our different environments are immediately liked or disliked in order to facilitate responses that contribute to well-being and survival. Studies have demonstrated that these rapid, immediate, and automatic emotional responses to various environments save precious time and energy spent learning which environments were beneficial or harmful. Now, one result of saved time and energy is stress reduction or even prevention that comes from being able to automatically perceptually identify benign, non-threatening, and supportive environments. In 1997, Wise argued that we should be able to replicate the characteristics of these innately preferred benign environments in our built environments. Then in 2002, Wise and Taylor further proposed that if we did possess a genetically pre-programmed set of emotional responses and perceptual structuring templates to the forms of the natural environment, that would be the most direct way to design built environments to positively support mental processes. But being able to demonstrate that we have the capability to identify beneficial environments quickly didn't tell us how we were able to do that. and how to identify this natural structure and use it in an interior design without having to mimic nature itself was the key. The answer to the how, again, took a while to figure out, and it actually provided answers to a 16-year-old mystery. The answer came by revisiting a mystery left unresolved in an experiment conducted by Wise and Rosenberg, conducted in 1986 at the NASA Ames Research Center, in which 24 subjects were seated singly in a simulated space station cabin facing a bulkhead featuring one of these 4 images. The subject performed a sequence of 3 types of stress-inducing mental tasks: arithmetic, logic, problem solving, and creative thinking, with each task period separated by a 1-minute recovery period. Each subject's physiological response to the stress of mental work was measured continuously by changes in skin conductance, heart rate, blood pressure, etc. Prior studies had shown that skin conductance was a reliable indicator of mental performance stress, with higher conductance occurring under high stress. The question being asked was which stimulus condition would produce the best performance and least stress? Well, the expectation, based on current thought at the time and growing evidence that natural scenes were restorative, was that the photograph of the forest would produce the most favorable results. What they found was that although the forest scene did produce more favorable results, a 3% reduction in stress compared to the geometric squares or the white control panel, the more abstract savanna scene produced a whopping 44% reduction in stress compared to the control conditions. They had no explanation for why the savanna did better than the forest. Over the next 16 years, several other lines of research from evolutionary psychology and externalized cognition provided supporting evidence for Ulrich's psychoevolutionary theory. And they even identified connections between the sensed patterns of the physical work and the living environment with the work performance and quality of life experienced by its occupants. These bionomic studies revealed how human mental and perceptual processes run some of their control loops through the perceived surrounding environment. Now, this is analogous to the phenomena that you experience when you leave a place, forget what you intended to do, then immediately remember it when you return to the place where you made the decision. You have unconsciously accessed the cues in the environment that your mental processes use during cognition to form that memory. This is a common biological, energy-efficient strategy that reduces the neural cost of cognition and emotion management to the organism. Thus, our minds and feelings are at their best in settings that recreate, in real or analog form, certain aspects of our ancestors' preferred biological environments, in specific, those of savannas, as proposed by Orens in 1980. Thus, the reason Wise and Rosenberg found the unexpected greater stress reduction they did seemed to be associated with the evolutionary familiarity of the savanna scene over the forest scene. But as intriguing as that answer is, the real answer is even more intriguing. Next slide.
We will, thank you, Remo, for reminding us on the time. We will move to the conclusions.
Okay.
And the question is, can we build the perfect habitat? Maybe you can take this slide, Sheryl.
Okay.
I think this is the most important for the...
Right. Okay. All right. The problem, why haven't we yet built the perfect habitat that fits all and every situation, is manifold and can be summarized as follows. 1, what we know is based on imperfect terrestrial analogs and a few orbital transport vehicles and bases, all of which involve limited number of human members and limited duration. Our ability to generalize to critical factors for a permanent IC habitat intended to be occupied for extended durations is almost non-existent. 2, only a few people can report on the outer sphere experiences. As I've noted, there's only been a few very minimal group of individuals. 3, there are existing few existing opportunities to test new habitat designs in locations that are remote locations here on Earth. 4, all of our perceived experiences are deeply mired in cultural practices. Cultural mindsets are powerful lenses that shape the desirability and acceptability of things, including what we expect in our living spaces. What is acceptable for one group may be completely unacceptable to another. 5, there are both individual and group processes that have to be addressed in designing functional supportive facilities. All the above mentioned are interdependent and involve dynamically changing relationships. It makes for a very challenging to quantify and measure.
We have found some goals for habitability design in space. I leave this for you, and 10 rules of thumb for habitability design. But the most important rule is it's not how large you make it, it's how you make it large. Thank you very much. We're looking forward to your questions.
Can you please stop the sharing?
Yes.
Can you please stop the sharing? Great. So thank you. Thank you for this lively, interesting and enthralling presentations. You went well deep into the technical and psychological issues connected with living in space and in other extraterrestrial environments. But you also suggested solutions that, at least to me, look effective and feasible. I think that we all are now ready to go to the moon.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have at least one question, Arthur?
I don't see anything in the chat, but I would just like
Do
to
you
add
have a comment?
I'd like to add a comment based on my own personal experience.
Yeah.
I sent the Cosmic Dancer sculpture to the Mir space station in 1993, and the cosmonauts practiced with a model of the Cosmic Dancer on Earth, which was painted kind of violet. But I decided the one I would send to the Mir station would be green. So when it arrived on the Mir station, the cosmonauts were surprised, happily that it arrived, but they were very pleased that it was green, because they actually said the combination of the light green and the yellow color has a more calming effect. And this is very important for us in stress situations. So this was an unasked for feedback of what actually was there, because the Mir environment was very industrial, if you want, and had there was hardly any green in it. So just adding a touch of green to the environment, they immediately responded to that. I thought was an interesting aspect of that mission. So yeah, I like the green idea. So we're going to probably have all kinds of bioreactors and other kind of things in all of our habitats. So that's very important. And yeah, the golden rule.
A couple of questions, I think.
That's not a question. I just was sharing an experience then.
No, I mean that there are two questions, I think.
I don't see one in the chat. Do you see it?
No, in
the
the
Q&A.
questions.
Aha, in the questions. Okay, it came someplace else.
I think the one from Ariana Patton fits to your comment, Asa, because she's asking for the best materials. You know, I think it's a very good question, because we always want to have a solution very quick and immediate. And maybe some people don't know that so far, space has tried to fit as many people as possible with every, design decision. The spacesuit, ergonomics, you have the small percentile and the large one. And same with smells and materials and colors, as you said, Asa. Colors are only allowed within a range so far, right? And only alerting colors have signaling effect. Same as with smell. It was not allowed or seen appropriate to have smelly food. And I think similar is with all the materials. So far we have very conventional, boring, or one palette color materials. And from an architectural point of view, I would say when we go towards living spaces, we have to decide to distinguish between materials, colors, appearances in private areas, personal areas, and in social areas. For example, this is reflected already in Antarctic design. Heli 5 was one of the first Antarctic stations that was designed, constructed with an architect, by an architect, Hugh Broughton. And he used, for example, wood that is smelling. And wood that reminds you of, you know, home. And I think for Mars 500, also the interior was wooden. So, but it is very difficult to choose the right material, similar to what we said. It's not the right habitat. Well, maybe Sheryl can say something more about the ideal person.
Yeah, no, and we need to add textures to that list too, because you could, if you just have the flat metal surfaces and just do them different colors, you get the bump from colors. But if you have different textures, wood would give a completely different texture than just the color of wood. Textures are very important to humans because they suggest different a different experience. Remember, we're talking about how do you experience the habitat? How do you experience the environment? And to the extent that we can put things in there that remind us of Earth, remind us of our home, and that kind of things, then it's going to be more familiar. It's going to be more comfortable. We're going to cognitively process things and be less stressed. So the whole goal here is whatever works to reduce the stress. So,
yeah, well, it would really seem like if in a habitat, if the astronauts had the possibility to nurture a growing entity, plants of some kind, that this would make them, more psychologically adaptable to the situation, because they actually are having a piece of nature that they're taking care of with them in the environment, and it could turn into food or oxygen or whatever, but it would be psychologically as important to do an activity like that.
Oh, definitely. You know, even during Mir, the Soviets, as I said earlier, they had their own little, they developed their own little greenhouses, and they got very affectionately attached to their plants, that kind of thing, you know, watching them grow and nurturing them. And it's that whole response to other living processes in a very sterile environment. So to the extent that we can provide those for multi-purpose, food, oxygen, you know, removal of carbon dioxide, and the psychological side of it, then that's definitely something we should strive to be pursuing.
Great stuff. Remo?
Yeah. Well, I think that we are at the end of our webinar. I wish to thank Sheryl and Sandra for these wonderful presentations. And we'll think of something else to do together.
Okay.
I can answer the questions in the chat.
Yeah.
We have a chat.
If we have to quit now. Shall we do this?
Oh, we have
Yes,
another
please.
one.
Yes. Yes, go ahead.
Because thank you for the question again, Aguro, Celia. I think this is a very important question to our work. What I would suggest in the private areas and the challenge, because private and personal areas are super individual. When you think of the images from astronauts' crew quarters, you will see that all of them bring personal stuff from Earth, postcards, images, stickers, or even teddy bears, or some other gifts, something that is important to them or reminds them about their relations on Earth. And we as architects, this is also the discrepancy, because we as architects should, I think, provide a frame, but the life should be provided by the people living in it. And we talked about the previous architects and designers, like the window, for example. A space was designed and people were told how to behave in the space. Now we have a change. We should design a space allowing people to behave as they would like to.
That's very good.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Okay, just one comment for everybody watching. We will have this webinar will be recorded, excuse me, and then we will put it on lunarology.space website, so you can look at it afterwards. And yeah, it's a great event. Thank you very much. And hope everybody can visit the Moon Village website, Moon Village Association website. It's a very active organization and doing a lot of stuff. And we are the Cultural Considerations Working Group.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. We enjoyed it.